Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first HR Quarterly of 2026. I'm here with my colleague, Maarten van Kempen from Pallas and we are here to inform you on the latest in employment law, specifically for HR professionals. We are going to discuss a few topics with you all. First, we are going to update you on some legislation, especially given the fact that we have a newly installed government. We are going to give some more information on holidays and holiday pay, because the summer holiday season is coming up. And then my colleague is going to discuss relevant case law, restructuring, and the social plan. And then it's time for a Q&A for all your questions. So, an update on legislation. So there is a lot to be updated on, so we're going to focus on two main things. We're going to update you on the EU Pay Transparency Directive first. So there's a lot of talk with regard to the EU Pay Transparency Directive because the deadline for implementation is coming. The Netherlands is late, but as I understand, the whole of Europe is late. So in that sense, we are not late. I just want to briefly touch on this. This directive introduces minimum standards and extensive transparency requirements to strengthen equal pay between men and women, and it applies to all employers and affects all employees with an employment contract. So first, just some formal things. The EU member states have until the 7th of June 2026 to turn the directive into national legislation. The Netherlands published draft legislation in March 2025, and it's estimated to enter into force on the 1st of January 2027 instead of the 7th of June 2026. The main goal of the Pay Transparency Directive is to close the gender pay gap, and it does this by increasing transparency both before hiring and during employment. And employees will have more rights to access information about pay levels, and employers will have reporting obligations. So in short, there are three main obligations. The compensation structures internally. So an employer has to implement a job evaluation system based on objective criteria and establish and define employee categories and involve the Works Council or the unions with this. Also, there are transparency rights for the job applicants, but also for the employees that are working at the employer. For the job applicants, there is the right to information on starting salary and pay range. This has to be disclosed before they start the job. So in the, the job description or the job posting. And for employees, there is the right to information on pay levels and criteria, and the right to compare pay with colleagues, meaning equal work. And then the last thing is the reporting obligations for employers. So the employers with more than 100 or more employees have to report on the gender pay gap, and it includes the pay differences and the pay differences in categories, which also they have to inform why there is a pay gap and how they are going to close the pay gap. And if there's a pay gap of 5% or more, they have to make a plan with the unions or with the Works Council to reduce it. And that is in short the EU Pay Transparency Directive. We are aware that this is a topic that is discussed lots of times in blogs and in webinars, so we're not going to talk about this anymore. So the next thing we want to discuss, because as I was saying, in the beginning of this year, we have a new government installed, and they have a new coalition agreement. It's called Aan de Slag. Or,
let's go to work.
Yeah, let's go to work with D66, VVD en CDA. And next slide. So there are a few labor law plans that we want to briefly discuss with you. And I have to say beforehand, details are not, we don't have a lot of details. So it's quite high level, but it gives an indication on what kind of plans there are for the future of working Netherlands. Well, this plan that focuses on creating more dynamic labor markets, shifting from job security to employment security, with a lot of reforms. One of the reforms is social security. So we have unemployment benefits called WW from the werkloosheidswet. And they intend to make the WW 80% of your last earned salary instead of 75 for the first 2 months. But they are going to reduce the length of that you can be eligible for WW from 2 years, 24 months to max 1 year, starting 2028.
That's not very long, is it?
No, that's quite short. Yes. And the idea of the government is if we give them a higher security in payment for the first 2 months, people will be more likely to find a new job sooner. That can be, but it becomes the eligibility criteria are becoming stricter. So employees must have worked for 42 weeks out of 52 weeks instead of the current 26 weeks in the last 36 weeks. So a slight difference. Next,
so it's more difficult.
Yes. You have to have a job long enough to be eligible, and it's becoming harder. Yeah. Then another thing is the disability insurance system, or VIA. So in the Netherlands we have the VIA Work Income Act, and it consists of mainly 2 schemes. The IVA for full and permanent disability benefits, and the WGA, that's the return to work scheme for partially disabled workers. And the government plans to abolish the IVA starting 2030 and focuses on more prevention. So the WGA becomes the main scheme for all disabled workers. So there's more attention to trying to find a job and having some kind of employment instead of not working at all. But it has lower and less benefits compared to IVA. And the government wants to reduce inflow via reintegration. So more efforts for employers to try to reintegrate their employees. And they intend to lower the maximum daily wage for not only the VIA, as it says on my sheets, but for all benefits that you get through the UWV. So
that means that if you would be eligible for unemployment benefits,
yes,
it's not only shorter, but the gap between
what you're getting,
your old salary and what you're going to get, may be lower.
Yes,
especially this is more or less a high income problem then.
It is, because the daily maximum wage is quite high if you compare it to the median wage in the Netherlands. But they're going to lower it by 20%. And I think the idea behind it is to make people find a job sooner, activate them to find a better paying job instead of staying into the unemployment benefits.
Yeah, but it's also related then to, for example, women getting pregnant.
Exactly, yeah.
And employers agreeing to pay full salary, so they're going to pay them more.
Maybe, yes. That is the expectation.
If it all comes through.
If it all comes through. As I was saying, there are not a lot of details available. These are the ideas that they have. It's part of a bigger plan, of course, with fiscal reductions, etc. But that's not part of the presentation today.
So then it's something that we will keep on monitoring for the months to come.
Exactly.
So the next HR quarterly, we may have an update again.
Yes, exactly. But there's more. So illness and reintegration. This is a hot topic in the Netherlands because when you have an ill employee, they have the right to get continued pay for 2 years of illness. That's not the fully 100% of salary, but it is significantly, and it's a significant burden for employers. So the government wants to make it more manageable for small, medium employers. It's unclear what the details are, I have to say. They want to reduce the wetpoortwachter burdens. It has a lot of administrative burdens, of course, as HR professionals know. So they want to reduce that. And I think this is also a surprise, the compensation for transition payment in long-term illness ends for all employers. So right now, if you have an employee that is sick for 2 years, after ending employment, you pay transition allowance, and this employer is allowed to get compensation through the UWV. The plan was, before our new government came, to end it for the large employers, this compensation, because they have more means, but to keep it in place for the smaller employers, and I think also the middle or the medium employers. But the plan now is to end the whole compensation.
But are they also going to stop then with the transition allowance itself?
Well, that is a good question. Thank you. I will get to that point, or maybe I can see if I can get it. Because there is a change. I'm sitting... Well, I cannot find my sheet, but I can tell you what is going to happen.
Yes.
Because now when employers end the employment relationship with employees, they have to pay a transitional allowance, which can accumulate to a high amount. But the plan of the new government is to, how do you say, employers do not have to pay this transitional allowance if they can show that they made efforts in, how do you say,
for reintegration.
For reintegration, but also studies, making sure they are employable, stay employable. If you have made these efforts and you can show that, then you don't have to pay the transitional allowance. I don't know how they are going to do it and what the exact details are, but this is one of the ideas.
So when do you think that we can expect the first legislation?
I don't know. Do you have an idea, Marta?
Hopefully within now and 6 months.
Yeah.
At least the first ideas, because of course we have the Ministry of Social Affairs is working on these plans right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we'll keep you updated in the next couple of months.
Yes.
During the year.
Yes, exactly. Dismissal and employment conditions. Oh yeah, this is the transitional allowance.
Yeah.
So it is linked to training and reintegration. So if you can show that you have given training to your employees to make them employable, then maybe you don't have to pay the transitional allowance or a lower one. So we also have the mirroring principle, the afspiegelingsbeginsel for the Dutch-speaking people. That is quite a rigid system we have in the Netherlands, but also I think a good system. But they want to introduce a more human touch to the mirroring principle. Unclear what that is. It is what they are saying is that you get more options as an employer to look at how is this employee performing, etc. But it's unclear how the parameters are and how you can ensure that there's no discrimination, etc., because the whole mirroring principle was made to make...
It was more a rigid system.
Yeah,
it's a rigid system. So they're going to personalize it a little bit more.
Yeah.
But that will mean that performance may become part of it, but that's difficult. Because that's quite a subjective element.
Yes. And how do you prevent discrimination of women, elderly, etc.? So I'm interested in how it's going to be, but we'll see. And a few other things. The non-compete clause is going to be modernized for mobility. This is some legislation that has been in the pipeline for a while now. I think we discussed this exact topic a year ago. So nothing changed with regard to that.
Okay, there's a question for you. Maybe can you explain what the mirroring principle actually is?
Yes, of course.
How does it work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in the Netherlands, when you are reorganizing, you cannot just pick and choose which employees you want to make redundant. You have to put the employees in groups. We call that uitwisselbare functies. So, how do you say it in English?
Exchangeable.
Exchangeable positions. And in practice, that means if you have accountants, you have accountants in this part. Well, these accountants are interchangeable, so they are going to be one bunch. And then in that bunch, you are going to make cohorts of ages. So I don't know the cohorts now.
15 to 25.
Yeah, exactly. And all these cohorts are the employees. And then you're going to take a look on who has the longest tenure and who has the shortest tenure. And then it's last in, first out. That is the mirroring principle. There are some exceptions that I won't get into because that can be quite technical. But to say the least, it is quite a rigid system, but it also ensures that there is less age discrimination, etc. Right. Is your question answered? If you have more questions, let me know.
Absolutely.
Lastly, the government want to make more flexible CLAs and less discrimination on the job market. They have not explained how, but they are going to try to create less discrimination on the job market.
So actually they have a lot of plans for the labor market.
A lot of plans, and it's not the end. There's more. The next thing is freelancers and flexibility. So the whole Self-Employment Act discussion is going on for, I think, 15 years now, or 20 years or more. And the government has new plans for the Self-Employment Act and is introducing or wants to introduce 3 tests and a committee. So when assessing if you are self-employed or just an employee with a lot less protection, there are 3 tests that, according to the government, are going to happen. The first is the self-employment test. So that focuses on the characteristics of the worker. So entrepreneurial behavior, do they have more clients, do they have a website, etc., etc., a number of clients, financial risk, and a degree of independence in organizing their work. The second test is the work relationship test, so between the worker and the employer, or the, how do you say? Anyways, that examines the actual working relationship between the contractor and the client, specifically looking for elements of authority, so the gezagscriterium, and integration into the organization that could indicate disguised employment. And the third one is the sector test. So it allows for sector-specific presumption of employment, recognizing that in some industries like delivery, care, construction, etc., fake self-employment is more prevalent, and there are going to be stricter rules. And the last one, and that is, I think, a new thing, is the binding review committee, where freelancers, clients, etc., can request an advance ruling on the nature of the working relationship. And these rulings will be binding for the institutions such as the tax authorities or the pension funds, etc. So I think that is something that will help a lot of self-employed workers.
Who are going to be in this authority?
I don't know. Who in the review committee?
Yeah,
that's a good question.
Yeah, just wondering.
Yeah,
and what does it mean? And does this committee can also influence the relationship between the worker and the employer?
I don't know if they can influence, because they are the relationship. They are there to give a binding conclusion.
Yeah, but that's for social security, for tax purposes.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh well.
Just to give certainty, because as you all may know, the tax authorities are starting to act a bit more on fake or false self-employment. So that can lead to fines, etc. So having a binding upfront clarity can be nice, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good for business.
Good for business. So these are, in short, the most important elements on the new coalition agreement. And then we will go to our next topic, and that's holidays and pay. Because, the summer holidays are coming in fast. People are planning their summer holidays, and employers are giving their okay or declining summer holidays. So I thought this is a good moment to refresh our memories on how this works in the Netherlands. So, holidays and pay. There are a few topics I want to discuss. The accrual of statutory and contractual holiday entitlements, and also during sickness and leave, but also during the third year of sickness absence, the expiry and lapse of accrued holiday entitlement, requesting, granting, refusal, sick during holiday, and also pay during holiday leave. And again, if you have questions, please let us know. So the accrual of holiday entitlements. So what is holiday leave? Interestingly, there is no formal legal definition of what is holiday leave, but in the legislative history, it is understood as a period during which the employee is released of their work obligations. Also, from an EU law perspective, rest and recovery, the recuperative function is very important. So the employees have to have leave with pay and relief from the obligation to work. This is very important, and you will see why in my later slides. So the statutory minimum is 4 times the weekly working hours per year, and additional holidays can be granted as above statutory leave. So there's one exception. So no accrual takes place where an all-in salary is agreed. And this is only acceptable in limited situations, typically where the employee works very few hours and irregular hours. Think about students, etc., who work maybe 4 hours, maybe 6 hours a week. And sometimes agreed upon through a CLA that it is allowed. I think the Bouw and Infra has these kinds of rules. And this arrangement must be fully transparent to make sure that the employee knows what her or his entitlement to holidays is. And most importantly, even in the cases where it's an all-in salary, these employees have to have the right to go on their statutory holiday leave. And they have to must be given the opportunity to take the time off. And this right cannot be bought off. That does not mean that you also have to pay during their holiday, because it is an all-in salary, so they will not get paid. But they still have the right to take 3 days. Yeah, all right. The accrual during sickness. So this applies to both statutory and above statutory leave. Employees continue accrual of their holidays during illness, and it is based on their salary entitlement, not actual work. So during maternity leave, adoption leave, etc., you still accrue your holidays, but not during parental leave, because that's voluntary leave and also not comparable to working time. And there is more flexibility regarding above statutory leave. That's maybe interesting for HR to know, that you cannot sell your statutory leave days, because that is not in line with the recuperating function of holidays, but the above statutory days are allowed to be sold, and you can discuss other or agree on other rules with regard to these above statutory days. Sometimes you see that employers have agreed upon that they if someone becomes ill, first they will use their statutory above statutory sick leave days, and then they will have just sick leave. But yeah.
So that's actually a matter of designing your HR administration.
Exactly.
To make sure that you add the right.
Yes, there's just
days.
More flexibility. But as long as you don't touch the statutory minimum, that's very important. And the last, what happens during the third year of sickness absence? So we call that in a dormant employment relationship, slaap en dienstverband. So as I just discussed, the first 2 years is paid, but the third year, sometimes when it is a dormant employment relationship, you will not get paid, but you are still on the payroll. And there has been case law on that employees are requesting holidays And some courts decide that they do accrual holidays during their third year of illness, and some say they don't. The Rotterdam Subdistrict Court recently, the 5th of February, made a ruling that in a dormant employment relationship, the underlying purpose of holiday leave disappears. Why? Because there is nothing to recuperate from. That's the first thing, because you don't work. So you don't need the rest also from the work that you're doing. And the second thing is because we have a social security system. So you automatically have another form of income. So, and that will also include paid holidays. So that is the reasoning that the Subdistrict Court decided that there's no accrual in the third year. But just know that this is a gray area, because also in the legal literature, there's a lot of discussion about this.
Well done.
Yes. Okay. Expiry and lapse. Time is going very fast. Okay. Expiry and lapse of accrual holiday entitlement. So statutory leave lapses 6 months after the end of the calendar year which you got the leave. So, and for this year, that's the 1st of July, 2026. So it's coming soon. Just a heads up for all the HR professionals. And it applies only if the employee had a real opportunity to take leave. So there can be instances where an employee is not aware that they are losing their statutory holidays, and an employer has a duty to inform and encourage their employees to take leave. So, and that is quite a high threshold as an employer. So you have to inform your employees about their leave balance regularly, warn them about their expiry, and also encourage them to take leave in time. If you don't do that, if the employee has no chance to take leave, if you don't approve their leave and they lapse, then that is a problem. Yeah.
So is that something that you can implement in your HR system? That you make sure that you have send out the mails. And what would be a good time to send such a mail?
I think make sure that the system, if you use AFAS, sends out 2 mails per year with "this is your balance. Please know that they are going to lapse on X or Y dates," to ensure that employees are aware. And also, if you, as HR, I don't know how the systems work, but if you can see that some people have a lot of holidays left, have a conversation with them to see if they are in need of vacation and if they are aware that they can take vacation.
Yeah, because you have many systems in which employees can log in themselves.
Exactly.
So, but that's the other way around. So that wouldn't be sufficient, I would say.
No, especially because the burden of proof is with the employer to show that they did, in fact, inform their employees, encourage their employees to take leave. And that does not mean, you can log into AFAS or whatever and see it yourself.
So it requires an active approach from the employer.
Very active approach, exactly. And just for your information, above statutory leaves lapses after 5 years. So that's a longer period, but it's also above statutory.
Yeah, so that's the reason why you first should take off.
Yes, the statutory. Exactly. Yeah. No questions? Also, requesting, granting, and refusal. This is something that sounds very simple, but can go horribly wrong and end in litigation. So requesting leave, that is something that is with the employee. They must submit a request for leave. They decide on which time they want to enjoy their holidays. And normally an employee has to, grant their holiday and approve it. So the default is follow the employee's request. Refusal, however, is possible for compelling business reasons, but it has a very high threshold. It has to be a serious disruption of operations. I have to close up shop if you don't come next week. These kinds of serious disruptions of operations.
A question has arisen from Stephanie. She wants to know, is leave accrued during paid parental leave?
Paid parental, yes.
Yeah, during paid parental leave it is.
Yes.
Okay. And is there a legal definition from Tracy here? Hi, Tracy. Is there a legal definition of how to calculate the value of holiday days? Because it's not just a salary. It's more, the salary is a broad
Exactly. Yes. There is a value. There is a legal definition on how to calculate the value of a holiday days in case of payment. Very good question. It's not in law, but it's in case law, so it's not in the DCC. And I will get to your question in a few slides. So bear with me. So as I was saying, you can only deny the request of an employee if it causes serious disruptions for operations, and you must respond within 2 weeks, including the compelling business reasons in case of refusal. If you don't respond or don't give the compelling business reasons with your refusal, the leave is deemed granted in 2 weeks. And then that's it. Another possibility is to deviate through CLA or the employment agreement. So what you see sometimes in the construction sector, you have the bouwvak, which are a few weeks that they all collectively are on holiday, and you can deviate through a CLA or the employment agreement.
Yeah, we do it, for example, on the day after Ascension Day, for example, which is the Friday after Ascension Days.
Yeah.
For many companies, such a holiday.
Yeah. Let's see, sick during holiday leave. I will be very short on this. If if an employee becomes sick during a planned holiday, there is no recuperation possible, and they can call in sick. And if they follow the internal rules that the company applies, remain reachable, doctor's notes, etc., then they can take their holiday at a later moment. So yeah, holidays convert into sick days and no deduction of holiday entitlement. Pay during holiday leave. Now, Tracy, I'm getting to your question right now. This is a very important topic and there's a lot of discussion about this. The main rule is that an employee is entitled to 100% of their normal remuneration during holiday leave. Why? The employee must be in a comparable financial position as when working. Otherwise, this would be a negative incentive to not take a holiday and therefore no recuperation function. So what is included in this salary? The base salary, structural allowances, commission, bonuses, if structurally earned, and the 13th month. So that means that if an employee is an account manager and they have a part of their salary that is variable, but they are going on holiday for 4 weeks or 3 weeks, that means that they cannot accrue commission. And that would mean that they will have a lower income because they went on holiday. That is a negative incentive. So you have to take the median of what they have earned on commission and take that into account as well when calculating the holiday pay. So what is excluded? Incidental payments, but also expense reimbursements. And what about overtime? There's a lot of litigation about this as well. Overtime is also included if regularly worked overtime. And it is a significant part of their total pay, and it's also contractually required to work overtime. Then also HR needs to take overtime into account as well. And that is the way to calculate it. So there's not a formula that we can use, but you have to take a good look at their salary slips.
And pension premiums?
Pension premiums are also excluded.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Veronica is coming back on the parental leave and accrual of holidays.
Yeah.
She says, well, is it then, do you only get 70%?
The accrual of holiday paid parental leave is also based on 70. No, that is what you get paid. But
that's the salary you get paid. But many companies, of course, they say, okay, we will compensate to 100%.
Yeah.
But it's a paid day, so you do accrue a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the value of the day is a day.
Is a day.
And it doesn't matter whether it's a 70% day or a 100% day. It's a day.
Yeah.
So when you would, let's say, would be under a 70%, suppose you're under a parental leave and you want to buy off some holidays. At what rate would you then?
At the full rate of your salary.
It's the full salary.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. And the important thing is to know that if you also are ill, you can get 70% of your salary, but you accrue fully 100% of your holidays. And that means that if an employee goes on holiday during sick leave, they have to take the full holidays as well. Yep. So if you are only working 2 weeks an hour, that doesn't mean that you have to take 2 hours a day or per week if you are ill. That doesn't mean that if you're going to on holiday, you only take 2 hours of your holiday balance. You take the 100%. So the week that you're going, for example. Yeah, good question.
All right.
So this is the end of my part.
Okay.
Maarten, I will give you the clicker.
Thank you. Let's see if I can use it somehow. Well, I'm going to discuss with you some relevant case law, and I'll do that on the topic of restructuring and social plan. Well, why? Because many companies are now in the phase that they are thinking of considering restructuring, and probably or already in the middle of such a process, or are in the process of preparing such a process. And restructuring means that you may have to lay off people. It may involve that you will have to inform and discuss the plans with your works councils and maybe with unions, and you may or may not wish to conclude a social plan. And maybe you already have a social plan in place. So this topic also leads, of course, to some case law, and I think that I would like to take you along 3 issues which crossed quite recently, and one has to do with dismissal and the transfer of undertaking. It is restructuring after a transaction, I would say. Exactly. So it's a post-merger integration issue. Second is, of course, collective dismissals. Collective dismissals is, of course, based on a European directive for a long time. Takes a lot of people to lay off, but it has specific rules, and of course, it may lead to risks, and as I can show you, some disputes. And finally, I'll lead you, if you still have time, but I hope you do, to some disputes about agreed social plans. But first, let's start with this transfer of undertaking. And the reason is that quite recent, on February 6th, our Dutch Supreme Court gave a ruling, and the ruling was based on what we call the prohibition on termination, which is due to transfer of undertaking. And that means, and it says below, because of course you all understand that the transfer of undertaking is also based on a European directive and laid down in the law, Article 670, under 8 of the Dutch Civil Code. And it more or less says that if you want to lay off a person because of the fact that he was subject to a transfer of undertaking, such a layoff is prohibited. And the question then, of course, is when is that the case and when is it not the case? And in the directive, it is quite clearly stated that yes, it is prohibited unless we're talking about economic, technical, or organizational reasons which are related to this dismissal. And then, of course, the question rises, when is that the case?
Exactly.
When is that the case? And that is, in law practice, quite a thin line. It is quite difficult to establish that, because it is, in most transactions, you already know what you're going to do afterwards. So that means that these dismissals somehow have a relation with this transaction. And then the question is, okay, how far does it go? Does it mean that you can do anything? Or let's say, how much flexibility do you have after such a transaction? And well, the court ruled in a case regarding Jumbo. Jumbo is one of our Dutch leading supermarkets, family owned by the family van Eert. And I think they're number 2 in the Netherlands after Albert Heijn.
Yeah.
And so Jumbo and Albert Heijn are the 2 main competitive supermarkets on the top level. And Jumbo has its own supermarkets, and of course, like other supermarkets, they have franchise contracts with entrepreneurs who can then, under license, have their own Jumbo supermarket. And so we had this case right here where we had the Jumbo in a place called Roden, which is in the lovely Drenthe area. And this was a one-man shop, which means it was a small supermarket owned by a franchise owner. And he had employed a lady for 8 hours a week to do HR for this specific supermarket. Now, what happened? One supermarket.
Okay.
And she works there for 8 hours a week. And other hours, she worked as an HR consultant for clients. And she has a small job for another company. So she actually has a more or less diverse working area. So what happens? This franchise entrepreneur decides to quit and sells his supermarket via the Jumbo organization to another franchise entrepreneur, which is Maripan Group. And Maripan Group is, as you can see on the left, is a big franchise entrepreneur, because he doesn't have one Jumbo shop. No, he has 16 Jumbo supermarkets in its portfolio. And this would be number 17. So actually, also for Jumbo, a main franchise entrepreneur. So this happens. So this Jumbo becomes part of the Maripan Group.
Yep.
And then the question arises, what happens to the HR lady? Because as a result of transfer of undertaking, she enters into an employment with Maripan Group. And then the question arises, what can we actually, do we actually have a job for you? Because what you were doing is that you were actually working 8 hours for the specific supermarket in Roden. But Maripan Group uses what we call an HR service center, which is located in Groningen. And it has 2 HR advisors, it has some HR administration, and it has 1 HR manager. And this service center actually is very sufficient for the purpose of Maripan Group to manage all HR for the entire group of Jumbo supermarkets. So actually they say, look, your specific job is not the job that we have within Maripan Group. So we believe that we have, unfortunately, no other job for you. And so what they do is they decide to apply at the UWV or for organizational grounds for a dismissal. And what happens? The UWV refuses this dismissal. And they actually say, we believe that Maripan has not made it clear enough, plausible enough, that there is no room for her in this Maripan organization, either at the service center or elsewhere. You should have done more than that. So they say, and because of this, we believe that it indeed has a connection with this transaction. So UWV refuses to grant this dismissal application, and that means no dismissal possible.
Exactly.
Then Maripan has no other option than to go to court and to request for dismissal via the court, because that's the regular route in dismissal procedures on organizational grounds.
And Maarten,
yes,
in practice, do you see a lot of these cases? Because normally I think employers, they sign a settlement agreement.
Yeah, but this lady wasn't prepared to sign for a settlement agreement. So she said, I want to work. She wanted to stay working there.
For the 8 hours.
And if no agreement can be reached, then you end up in this routing.
Yep.
So in the end, they end up in court, and the court, the council and the superior court, and what I wrote down here is the superior court, they both grant the application. And they say, look, the prohibition determination referred to in the Dutch law as stated in 670 under 8. Yes, we understand the prohibition, but however, this prohibition does not prevent the new employer from deciding to adjust its workforce, also for economic, technical, or organizational grounds in the situation after the transfer.
Yeah.
So the court says, well, I think that in this case we are looking at these economic grounds, economic, technical, organizational grounds, which actually has no specific relation with the transaction itself. And
but it does have
but it does, because they knew they bought it, and they must have known we're not going to need that lady.
Yeah, they
so
must do a due diligence.
They must have done some due diligence. But what happens in this court case actually is that Markplan says, well, at the time of the transaction, we were not aware of what this lady was doing. We had no idea actually what they were working, which actually would say they didn't do any due diligence, which I find hard to believe, to be honest.
Me too.
But after the takeover, after we bought it, they say, then we started thinking, okay, how are we going to manage and how are we going to integrate the supermarket in our organization?
Yeah.
And the court says, well, because you didn't know up front and you only started thinking of this afterwards, we believe that there is not enough connection with the transfer.
Yep.
So this prohibition is not valid in this specific case. And then the lady doesn't agree and she goes to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court actually directly says, okay, look, we have legislation here based on the European Directive. And the European Directive says, indeed, that we have to protect people against the negative consequences of transfer of undertaking, which means, indeed, that there is this very high burden for dismissal. Exactly. If such a dismissal might somehow be related to this transaction. But the Supreme Court says, and that's quite important, they say, but the fact that, of course, we have to look at it very critically, doesn't mean that there shouldn't be no link at all.
Exactly.
You can have some sort of link. And the Supreme Court actually says, this directive is not only here for the employees alone, but it provides for a certain balance between entrepreneurs on the one hand and, of course, the rights of employees on the other hand. And the Supreme Court in this case also says, look, we believe that the Superior Court indeed has, let's see if I have another slide for this. No, I don't, so I'll go back. Actually says, well, the Superior Court actually looked at the situation and concluded that this company started looking at the situation afterwards.
Yeah.
And it has, in the eyes of the Supreme Court, validly motivated that this specific situation fell under these economic, technological, organizational grounds, and therefore the Supreme Court says that this dismissal can be granted after all. So this is actually the first case before the Supreme Court in which these ITO reasons are fully laid down in detail, and it gives us it gives companies a bit more flexibility probably, but
in practice it can be quite difficult, right? Because you have the post-integration things that you have to do in a company. You have the protection of the employees. How do you practically?
Well, the point is that in many transactions, the entrepreneur actually obtaining the business already knows what they're going to do, and of course the company selling also knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So I would say that this employee protection should be related to indeed the situation at the transfer itself, at the transfer day. Then you should have a look at what's happening. And of course, the shorter the period between the actual transfer date and, for example, the restructuring date, the date we start restructuring. So the shorter the period is, the more motivation the company will have to give to the employee and also to the UWV or to the court that it has no relation to the transfer itself, but that we are actually talking about economic, technical, organizational grounds which stand on itself.
And do you have a rule of thumb how long it has to be between the transfer of undertaking and the post-merger integration?
Yeah, not really. To be honest, not really.
And the legal literature.
The legal literature, and I think that they're looking at half a year, 9 months, something like that. But I would say if it comes quicker, it comes quicker. But it is something also for our viewers to be aware of, that if you're into a post-merger integration program, to look at these prohibitions.
Very critically.
Yeah. The next case law is about collective dismissals. And of course, you may be aware that we have the Collective Redundancy Notification Act, which is in the Netherlands. And it's based on a directive, also again a European directive. Yeah. A directive was already put in place in 1975, so over 50 years ago. And this Collective Redundancy Directive is in place in all European countries, following on the European Union. So what are the requirements in the Netherlands? We're talking about an intention to dismiss a minimum of 20 employees. And in the Netherlands, we say within a UWV working area, which actually in the Netherlands has been divided in 6 areas for that.
Yep.
These 20 people should be dismissed within a period of 3 months, 90 days. And the reason for dismissal is economic or organizational grounds. So what you do then is, of course, if you fall under the scope, you have to inform UWV and the unions that you are going to dismiss this number of employees. And of course, you have to invite unions and also the Works Council, by the way, to discuss this intention of dismissal, and even may discuss the beginnings of a social plan. That's the entire meaning of this act. And the point is that if you don't do that as a company, then the UWV and the court will not accept any application for economic grounds, so you cannot move on in that respect. And on the other hand, if you would opt to decide to close settlement agreements, so that you wouldn't go to the UWV or the courts, but you would conclude settlement agreements, please note that these settlement agreements can be annulled, or probably worse, employees could go for extra reasonable compensation for the employee.
Yeah.
Which means you think that you've reached a settlement agreement, reached an agreement on the transitional allowance or more, and afterwards it appears that you did not comply with the Collective Redundancy Notification Act, and then the employee could come back and say either I want to go back, or I want extra money.
Exactly. Yep.
And if we're talking about many employees, that could be a very costly affair.
Yeah.
So the case law I want to discuss with you, and is about the meaning of dismissal. What is dismissal? And you should be aware that the concept of dismissal is actually interpreted quite broadly by the European Court of Justice. And what are we talking? It's not just the termination of employment, it is also, as we say, the substantial changes of essential elements of the employment contract, for example. And you can think, for example, that you are talking to employees saying, we need you to agree upon another working place or other employment conditions, or otherwise we have to dismiss you to terminate your employment contract. And of course, maybe this is something which is more difficult in the Netherlands to achieve, but there are many countries in Europe in which it is quite easy, because they don't have the employment protection as we have here. Take, for example, Belgium. A reduction in the number of hours is also a possibility.
Yes.
We want you to go back from 38 hours to 24 hours.
Yeah, or work abroad within a
Work
branch.
abroad, an offer or transfer, anything.
Yeah.
All these kinds of
Substantial.
of changes are substantial elements of changes, and they may lead to the discussion whether or not such a dismissal, collective dismissal act is applicable or not. Now, what happened when we look at what happened last January at the Superior Court in Amsterdam? We had this pension advisor which actually had a restructuring project fit for purposes, number 2. So it was not the first one, it was the second one. And what happened, because of this restructuring, the company went to the Works Council to obtain advice. And actually what happened, what seemed to be the case is that in the end, they were looking at the redundancy of 13 employees, maybe 14. But on the other hand, it appeared that there were also many changes in various roles. So many employees got other roles. So what they did is actually they went to the UWV and they went there also for the application, and the application was refused by UWV. And the reason for refusal was not the fact that they did not comply with this Collective Redundancy Act. No, the reason for the UWV to deny the application was actually that there was no economic ground for this specific case. But when we go, this ends up in the end in court, and then this collective dismissal issue comes in place, and the employee actually says, look, UWV already denied, but you should deny as well, because they did not comply with the Collective Dismissal Act, because we are looking at more than 20 people being redundant. Not only the 13 or 14 employees being terminated, but also around 20 jobs which are lost and new positions. And if we look at the request for advice to the Works Council, we see 34.18 FTE to be eliminated.
Yeah.
So that is what the employee says. And the employer says, yeah, that may be so, but what we actually did was we looked at, okay, how many people do we have employed at this time? And after the restructuring, it will be only 13. So it's not 20. And then the question arises, what does the court say? Because this is actually also important to see, how does such Superior Court work? They said actually, well, look, what we see is an employee who actually says it is more than 20, and he actually motivates it very concretely how he comes to this position. And on the other hand, we only see some Excel sheets which shows that it would only go to that we were talking about 13 terminations. And then the court finally says, look, we believe that the company has not concretely motivated why it is less than 20, because the only fact that it's 13 is not enough, given the fact that the employee actually said we are looking at major changes on various employment contracts. And therefore, the Superior Court granted the claim of the employee.
It's quite confusing, right? Because we're talking about collective dismissal.
Act. But dismissal is a broad understanding of rules.
Yeah.
And that brings me now to the end, and that is the social plan, because we only have 1 minute left, and we're going to do a social plan within 1 minute. Please note, ladies and gentlemen, there's no legal obligation to do so. Of course, the Dismissal Act, the Collective Dismissal Act, provides at least that you discuss social plans with the Works Council or with the unions. And then the question rises, okay, who are you going to talk to? Will it be the Works Council or will it be the unions? And sometimes it's a combination of it. Recent case law to show you is that if a social plan enters into place, You can have interpretation issues. For example, a recent case in the DSM social plan was about the definition of the years of service, in which the court finally said we're going to just reading the lines in the social plan. And after that, it concluded that the unions in this respect were wrong. And the webinar is completed. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for bearing with us. We had a lot to tell you. I hope it was very informative. And we'll see you with the next HR Quarterly.